Hi, my name is Monica Cherrington. I'm in Mr. West's advanced drafting class at Joliet Central High School, and this is my second semester capstone project. So for my first project, the goal was to create a two-story house to become more exposed to the Revit software. Therefore, I decided to create this craftsman-style residence. The first step to building this residence was to set up the various levels that I needed in order to create all the objects in the Revit environment and rename the views. Properties like these, I feel, are the most important because if the properties are not set up correctly at the start, you can end up with a lot of errors later on. And in this room schedule here, you can see all the different rooms that I incorporated into my residence. So to create the exterior walls, I had to edit properties and materials of the walls that I would be placing in. I had to add in a wall extension, which basically dropped down the materials to below where the original walls were in order to cover up structural materials that made up the floor. Next, I drew in the foundation walls as support for the first floor walls, and here I had to modify the foundation walls because later on I would have the site slope down from the front of the house to the rear of the house. And then I used the generic walls to create the rest on the basement level. And at this point I also added in the footings and the bearings. Next, I added columns to the front porch and to the back deck that led from the first floor to the basement level. And after the house was finished, I created the site and added the topo surface or the grade so that the ground level would extend all the way around the perimeter of the building. I also created the road, sidewalk, and driveway by using subregions, which allowed me to define different shapes and different materials on the site. So after creating the house, I was able to get some renders of the interior and the exterior. And here in this picture, this is the dining room and a little bit of the kitchen. This is the full kitchen. This is the living room. And this is the back deck. And this is the front of the house. So for my second project, my goal was to create a portfolio of my different projects that I've done over the course of 4 years learning in the STEM field, which is the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Academy, basically. And at the time, I was actually applying for an internship, and I knew that having this portfolio to present at the interview would boost my chances of being selected for the internship. And it did prove to be useful at the end because out of the 4 that I had applied for, I was able to get 3 of the internships. So in my portfolio, some of the projects that I included were projects I had done in my advanced class, like models of these 2 houses. And this project of a residence showcased my skills in Revit, and I had the ability to familiarize myself with room schedules, dimensions, and detailed drawings. And I also added in my strengths that related to drawing in general because seeing that this was a general architecture portfolio that I was using to present, I would be able to show my various abilities in those areas. So in the left-hand corner, I actually just drew some portraits, and so I included that in the portfolio. And the other 3 are just drawings of my custom rim that I created in my first year of my technology computer-aided drafting class. So my third project was a mirrored acrylic LED sign, and the goal of this project was to become familiar with the laser cutter. Since I had never used the laser cutter in my 3 years of being in drafting classes, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we had a laser cutter and to gain more knowledge about other systems instead of just architecture and its related software. So I decided to create this mirrored acrylic LED sign. So my research for this project mainly included learning about the laser cutter and the acrylic I would be using, how to solder wires, and learning Adobe Illustrator. So first, to simulate this box and ensure the measurements I wanted would be appropriate, I made the individual parts in Autodesk Inventor. Doing this, I was able to locate where to make the cut for the mirrored acrylic sheet and the hole on the side for where the wire would pass through. And here are my calculations and my assembly of the box, the wooden box that would be basically the base. And to begin the laser cutting process, I used a box template for the measurements of the base that the mirrored acrylic sign would be placed into and set up those dimensions. And I had to experiment with various settings for the laser cutter in order to get the right power and speed to engrave the words I chose for the box. And at first, I laser cut the sign out of wood to act as a prototype before making the acrylic sign, and this was to ensure that the sign fit into the base and to make sure the bulbs fit within the given space. So using YouTube videos and Google, I was able to learn the basics of Adobe Illustrator in order to create the sign, and then I laser cut the sign, and here you could see the different settings I had to work with. Which, like, basically the top of the Eiffel Tower is darker than the rest because I was working with the settings and trying to engrave it at the right power and speed in order to get it not to, the flame not to sear, basically, the wood. And then I glued the base together after I laser cut out the acrylic. And this was how the sign would look like with the lights in, kind of just simulated that. And then I soldered all the wires and hot glued the junctions together and taped them just for safety measures. So this is me soldering all the wires in the box. And these are some pictures of the final product. And it turned out exactly how I wanted it to. It was a very fun project, and I was able to apply some things I learned in Adobe Illustrator as well. So my fourth project was basically learning Adobe Photoshop, and I knew that knowing the software basically is very important in the field of architecture and engineering, so I wanted to get a head start on knowing the program, and I was able to learn the settings, what they do, and how to use and apply them. So I wanted to 3D print my ranch-style house for my fifth project, and I used a video from YouTube in order to see how I would 3D print it from Revit, and I ended up having to download and install an STL exporter, which was this. And next, I had to go back into Revit and save the house as 2 separate files in order to 3D print the roof as a separate piece from the house. After I installed the add-in, I sent it to Ultimaker Cura, which was the 3D printing software. And the roof took about 9 hours to print, and the house itself took about 12 hours. And these pictures show the roof being 3D printed and the final 3D printed house piece at the bottom right there. And here are some pictures of the final model. So my sixth project was to make plaques for the JTHS 2019 retirees, and there were 3 teachers in total, so I created 3 templates for the wooden plaques in Adobe Photoshop. And then I simply engraved the plaques with the laser cutter, and this was the final product. And I thought this project was really neat because I was able to showcase my skills that I had learned in Adobe Photoshop and apply them to making these plaques, so it was really neat. So my goal for my 7th project was to create a pencil holder for my dorm room when I go to college, and I thought this would be really fun and useful at the same time. And since I will be using various drafting utensils for architecture projects, I wanted to make a pencil holder using the 3D printer. And I really like marble, like the marble design, so I also wanted to decorate the outside of the pencil holder with that pattern. And I thought hydro dipping looked really cool and would do the job well, so I built my design and hydro dipped it to create the final product. And this picture here, I was able to find this off of Pinterest, and I thought it was really a neat design, so I wanted to replicate that. And when making the part, I had to take measurements to ensure that the part was the height and width I wanted by creating a drawing file, but using the part to create a drawing file would make it easier for someone to replicate this project or customize their dimensions to whatever they wanted it to be. And then I changed the material of the part to ABS plastic and saved the file as an STL. And because I printed at a 1:1 scale, I was able to see how large it really would be and if I would be able to hold a decent amount of pencils. Then I sent the part to Cura to 3D print, where I changed the settings prior to printing. And here you could see it being 3D printed and the settings. And after this, I spray painted several coats of primer, then hydro dipped the part in gray and white spray paint to create a marble pattern, which is on the left. And in the middle, you can see me spray painting a clear matte coat of protective spray paint after it was hydro dipped. And on the right is the final model, the final project. So for my last project, in October, I was actually able to start a Joliet Central STEM newsletter, and each monthly newsletter basically wrapped up all of Mr. West's drafting classes at Joliet Central, and with 6 classes in total, I was able to include descriptions of what each class was working on during the month and conclude the newsletter with important upcoming events. And here are little clips of some different newsletters that I did create. So there's the showcase and just all the different classes that we summarized there. And overall, I was really happy with the outcome of all 7 of the projects, or all 8 of the projects. And these projects allowed me to gain more knowledge and experience with the laser cutter, the 3D printer, and various software. And I was able to apply these skills and basically make things happen. And I would like to thank Mr. West for guiding me and providing most materials for my projects, Mr. Greigel for letting me use the spray paint room, and Mr. Riley for allowing me the opportunity to 3D print the Retiree Plaques.